The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the producer and those appearing in this show and do not necessarily represent the views of DerryCAM, the town of Derry, or any of its staff or affiliates.
Hi, I'm Anthony Henry. Welcome back to America's Ass. We are on episode 30. This is the season 3 finale. Really excited that we're done season 3. It's been a lot of fun filming season 3. More interesting people to have on. Yeah, I'm really happy. So anyway, we are here with Representative Jess Edwards today. So please take a minute to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, hi. I'm State Representative Jess Edwards, representing Rockingham District 31. That's Floterial that includes Deerfield, Candia, Auburn, and Chester. I'm in my 4th term. I sit as the chairman for Division 3 Finance, which is the division that does all of the budget work for the Department of Health and Human Services. And then I do a few other things on the side.
Well, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
So anyway, we will briefly, like I say every episode, I like to touch briefly on Israel every episode since the conflict began. It's the single most important story in the world. I don't think anyone can dispute that. So we'll start with you. What are your just basic thoughts?
Well, my basic thought on it is that people have been trying to eliminate the Jewish people for thousands of years. The hate continues. I think it's horrible that Hamas violated a long-standing ceasefire by initiating a war on October 7th. They did initiate a war, and as the world calls for a ceasefire, I'm stunned that our own administration doesn't demand that Hamas immediately surrender and return all the hostages. The idea that we should just be accepting temporary ceasefires to allow Hamas to re-equip, reorganize, and prepare to repel Israeli forces at the cost of more Israeli lives is just disturbing to me. But I understand that there's a lot of tension in the world, and the big thing that our president is probably worried about is triggering World War III. But I think that we need to be taking a much stronger position to support Israel and to demand Hamas surrender. I've not heard the term coming from any administrator in this government that we demand Hamas's immediate surrender. And I think that clarity would be very important.
I agree, and I think Biden has been a lot more silent than you'd think he would be on such a matter. And I agree, it's probably because he's trying to prevent a world war. But I think a lot of this was caused by Biden's basic world ineptness. And I've mentioned this several times on the show. Go back to the Afghanistan withdrawal, or last year, the war with Ukraine and Russia. This is just another, I guess, calamity that's happened in the world under Biden. And you got to wonder, would it be different under someone else?
Well, it'd most definitely be different. You know, President Biden is a pitiful commander-in-chief. He's an embarrassment. I served 33 years in the Army, to include a year in Afghanistan, and they really could not have withdrawn from Afghanistan in a more clumsy way than what they did. I think any Eagle Scout and the Boy Scouts could have planned a much better withdrawal than what we actually implemented. I have no doubt that we had exit plans that were ignored, that had we followed them, we would have phased our withdrawal. I mean, for one thing, we would have communicated with our allies that we were planning to leave. We would have started to get the civilians out. In parallel, we would have been either removing vital military equipment or we'd be destroying it in place. Instead, we gave them an $87 billion gift of some of the best military equipment in the world. And that equipment, I'm sure, has been distributed around the world with the Taliban making money off of it. I also, because China is right next door and has commercial interests, I'm sure they rolled in there and did whatever intelligence gathering they needed to about our military capabilities. So it was just horrendous. And then you mentioned Ukraine. This president actually said before Russia's invasion that a little war wouldn't be much of a bother, or a little fight. So he basically greenlit Russia's incursion into the Ukraine without really stating clearly that the border was sacred and that we would want the border defended. But this is a president that also seems to care more about the borders of other nations than he does our own. We have an open border situation on along the Mexican border, and we've had 2.5, 3 million people come across the border claiming asylum. I think everybody knows it's a lie. They're not fleeing political persecution, is what the federal law requires. I think they're being trained and taught to lie when they get across the border to say that they're seeking asylum, which puts them into the country for 3 years before they get a court date. And as a result of the surge, the invasion of illegal immigration into the nation, the federal government is now spending $451 billion a year extra in order to deal with the human cost of those people being in our country. $450 billion is a lot of money. We're borrowing it now at a very high rate. We're borrowing it from countries like China. We're printing the money, which makes it mythical in a way, which will do long-term damage to our economy. We've already seen that with the high rates of inflation. So just in my perspective, from an international perspective, we couldn't have a worse president at this point.
And I agree. You touched on another thing that I forgot to mention, China. China's such a big deal, and possibly them invading Taiwan is another thing.
Right.
I know a couple state reps from New Hampshire recently went over for diplomatic purposes.
Right. I was supposed to go on that trip.
Oh, you were?
But I had ankle surgery and hadn't recovered yet. But I was gonna go.
Interesting. Well, do you know what exactly how it went?
Hey, it was Representative Mike Moffett and Representative Scott Wallace, and in talking to them since they came back, it was 4 or 5 days of excellent briefings over, about 4 or 5 briefings a day, where they learned the status of Taiwan from a social, cultural, economic, military perspective, historical perspective as well. They visited some of the key sites in and around Taipei. And as I understand it, the Taiwanese government could not have been more gracious hosts to my colleagues.
Very good. Yeah. So now we will touch on the First in the Nation primary.
Yeah.
Because we're taking a break in between seasons, we're not going to be back until after the First in the Nation primary.
Yeah.
So now is, I guess, when we can brush up on who's left, because a lot of people have left since we first started talking about the election. We're whittling it down to best of the best, I guess. So what are your thoughts so far on the election?
Well, I came out early and endorsed Governor Ron DeSantis. I think he's a proven individual who follows a common sense agenda in Florida. His handling of the pandemic was really about as good as you got in the nation. Kristi Noem in South Dakota did really great too, and I think our governor did okay. But DeSantis and Noem led the nation in how to deal with the pandemic, and they took a lot of grief for that. But the reason I have settled on DeSantis versus Nikki Haley versus President Trump is I really respect the fact that Governor DeSantis is a veteran who reached the rank of, I think, 04, lieutenant commander in the Navy. I'm an Army guy. I don't know what their ranks are. But anyways, he served in the Fallujah area in Iraq as an attorney, as a JAG officer. But the fact that he was in a hostile fire zone for a year, I think he probably perceives reality in a way in which the other candidates do not. When you're in the military, when you're in a hostile fire zone, you really focus on the things that are important, and you take care of the things that are important and the right priorities. And I think that his experience probably has translated very well into sort of his policy calculations on what's important and what he should invest in and what he shouldn't. Now, Ambassador Haley, former governor of South Carolina Haley, she's a very credible, powerful woman that would, I think, be capable of doing the job. I back DeSantis. Nikki Haley would be a perfectly fine alternative. President Trump, I think we all know he's going to win, though. So the Haley-DeSantis thing is a little theoretical because it's so obvious that President Trump is going to win the primary that it really gets to be an issue of who he's going to pick as his vice president. And I think that's an opportunity for him to really highlight the fact that he chooses much better people than Biden does.
And we had a much safer and stronger United States then than we do now.
Right, and again, the media is still trying to make things up and scare people. Like the headline today on the MSNBC page was trying to scare people about what Trump's plans were for the military within the United States if he were to win re-election. Well, it's just such nonsense. We saw the man for 4 years. He's the only president that didn't start a new war. He's the only president that led us to 4 peace treaties in the Middle East with nations who had historically opposed Israel to sign a peace treaty with Israel. I think from an international security perspective, he was able to stare down Kim Jong-il in North Korea. That guy had caused problems for every president when they had come in since he took power, and Trump put him basically into an appropriate place on the world stage, which is sort of quiet. And as far as the Chinese, he's really the first that stood up and essentially expected the Chinese government to treat us more fairly, not fairly, but more fairly on an economic perspective. China, as much as this administration wants to pretend that they're our friend, they really aren't. They don't want to be friends. They want to dominate the world. And that's not a huge surprise, because if you look at the last 3,000 years, there's been empire after empire after empire. There's been the American empire for the last 150 years or so, really since around World War I. And so, the question gets to be, can the United States continue to survive in sort of a world-leading way? And and China is there working against us so that they can replace us as dominating the world. And so I think it's really up to all of us to ask the question is, would the lives of 6 billion people on this planet be better under the American principles of respect for the individual, the sanctity of life, those kinds of things? Or would the world be a better place under sort of a Chinese model where they can tell you how many babies you can have and how they can force abortions on you, how they can exert complete total control over each individual's lives, where there is no due process in their criminal justice system. And I think we have a real question that isn't really being asked, which is, what is our obligation to the future? Do we believe that the American experiment has failed and it should be ended? Or do we believe that we should regenerate the strength to go ahead and exert social influence again, to spread democracy, real democracy?
I couldn't have put it better myself. You summed it up pretty good.
Well, I'm older than you. I've said it before.
So we'll move on to state government. I'm
Okay.
sure that's something you know a lot about because you've been around for 4 terms. So
Yeah.
you mentioned you chair Division 3 Finance. What's some of the interesting things you've done this past year there?
Well, the big thing is the first year of every 2-year term is where we come up with the budget. And it starts, some of this is a little bit boring, but the big chunks of it is really before the election, the governor is working with the executive branch to establish what they think their budget requirements are from a money and a manpower perspective. And then they continue to work that from the summer into January, where after the legislature's been elected, we get seated basically in January. The governor's budget gets released to us in February, and then the House takes the first look at the budget, and then we have about 6 weeks to review what the governor has done and to make our own changes. And then we turn that over to the Senate. They do their own thing to it. And because they'll be a little different than us, there's a final getting together to agree on things or to agree to disagree. But to the extent that we can agree, that becomes the budget that we pass to the governor to sign. So that's the mechanics of it. But the most interesting part of it isn't really the money as much as the money comes in what's called HB1, which is, you could imagine, an enormous spreadsheet with every line item and money being allocated to a line item, which is essential because that's the amount of money that can be spent. The more interesting thing is called HB2, which is a rider bill that complements HB1. And within HB2, there's the ability to effectively bypass a lot of the legislative process and create law within HB2 itself. And it's not a great way to go about doing business, but the governor in the last few years has inserted things into his proposal for HB2 that probably ought to have been bills that went through the committee process instead of trying to, I don't want to imply intent, but effectively there's a lack of transparency when the governor's office puts something into HB2 because there's inadequate committee hearings. So the fact that we got through what could have been a very contentious budget period with ending up with probably the most nonpartisan vote on the budget in 20, 30 years was really, I think, quite an achievement. DHHS, we were able to improve their Medicaid reimbursement rates significantly to account for inflation, to account for the fact that reimbursement rates had fallen so low that we were losing healthcare providers, and the system, I think, had become fragile, particularly up in the North Country. So the reimbursement rates should help improve our mental health capabilities. In particular, we've tried to do more to help parents with the needs of their children in the DHHS budget. So the budget is probably the biggest thing I did, or was involved with. I didn't do it. 400 people voted for it, but the thing that I'm kind of most proud of is working on a bill that was HB 49. The number doesn't mean anything to anyone, but since we had decided in a previous term to eliminate the Sununu Youth Development Center, which was essentially, for those people who don't know what the Sununu Center is, it's a locked, secure facility where you put criminal violators who are under the age of 18. And so when that facility was established, it was established for 144 people. It was established as a incarceration center more than a healthcare facility. And so what we've done is we've decided that what we're going to do is we're going to try to do another model. Rather than relying on a prison incarceration model, we're going to try to rely on a behavioral health approach. And that behavioral health approach will mean that when the kids are at the new facility, which is being designed now to go into Hampstead, it will serve primarily as a place where the kids get counseling, and they get integrated and supported in a continuity of care when they leave the facility, and we're going to make sure that they have ties to their community health providers as well. So we're going more to a system of care, longitudinal approach, and the recidivism rate, meaning how many kids recommit crime when they become adults after having been in the development center, is really high. I think it's in the 70 percentage points. So whatever we've been doing, we've been failing at least 7 out of 10 kids that come in there. And with this new model, we're going to attempt to provide sort of the wraparound mental health counseling and behavioral counseling and connect them to their community. And I'm not a Pollyanna about it. I think I think there are some kids that by the time they get to us, they are sort of lost souls, and it's going to be tough for them to change their lives. But if we can get that recidivism rate out of the 70% and get it even down into the 50% or 40%, then that change will really reflect well in the outgoing years. Instead of them becoming adult criminals, they can become productive members of society. So it's really our trying to flip them so that they can have the best, most productive life possible. They still are going to have to make decisions about whether or not they behave, they conform to societal norms, and they avoid criminal activity. We're not going to fix their soul, but we're certainly going to do our best to give them an honest shot at a healthy life when they turn 19.
I agree. I've been following what has been going on with the Sununu Center for the most part. I like that it's going in Hampstead. It's close by to Pinkerton. Hampstead's one of the Pinkerton towns. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of students at Pinkerton that have probably gotten in trouble with certain things. For example, Pinkerton has a big drug problem. We've had several drug busts. Like, I'm talking 5 cops go into a bathroom and raid it, get everyone out of there. Oh. Lots of drug deals happen. But I think it's an issue. I think mental health in youth especially. I think it's the biggest crisis in America, mental health.
Well, it probably was made worse when we shut down schools all around the country
Completely
and
agree.
forced social isolation on kids right when it's really important for them to be interacting with their peers. It's been a long time since I've been a teenager, but in retrospect, I've always viewed those early teenage years as sort of, being in combat, and you needed a foxhole buddy to figure out, what's important, what life is like, what girls want, all the really hard questions that you never do answer, but you really needed to do it with a buddy. You needed the interaction with others, and I think we're our own worst enemy in many regards when it comes to exacerbating the mental health issues.
I think it's something that America as a whole needs to solve. Just repeating what I said, but still, I think it's a huge crisis. It impacts everyone. Everyone knows someone that struggled. So we are just about out of time, so feel free to give a closing statement.
I've served 4 terms. I'm intending to serve or run for my 5th term this coming year. I think that as a state rep, your first term is really just enormously ineffective because you don't know what the heck you're doing. But by the time you get out of your first term and you start to figure out what it takes to be a legislator, then there's sort of this slight exponential increase in your ability to influence things. And so I think that I've in my 4th term, I've been able to make contributions to the state in a number of areas, one of which was to essentially stabilize our abortion law. There was a lot of contention around that when we passed it. And for the people who don't know, in New Hampshire, you can have an abortion for any reason up to 24 weeks. And the issue got to be after the 24 weeks if there were going to be any exceptions. So I submitted an amendment to fix that issue, and it passed 319 to 25 in the House, and it's now part of our law. So I really think that we've got a stable place where people can support the New Hampshire abortion law because there's free choice up for 24 weeks. It's a very long time.
Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. As I said, this is the last episode of Season 3. So I'd just like to thank everyone that's come on the show as a guest. I want to thank my friends who edit the show, Brady, Calvin, Kyle, Asher, and Sam. You guys are awesome. I want to thank the amazing crew at DerryCAM. I won't say their names because they'll be embarrassed, but they're all amazing. They know who they are. And yeah, while I take a break for a little bit from the show, go involve yourself. Go make some change. Go to a school board or town council meeting. Watch a House session or a Senate session. Just broaden your mind. Learn about how everything works, and trust me, you won't regret it. My name's Anthony Henry. You've been watching America's Ass. I'll see you in a little bit.